Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and welcome to the Post 117, Agency and Autonomy through the Taxonomy of Trouble. The session this week is part 2 of the wonderful Gab's request. Gab wanted some assistance from us all to think about what she described as the predatory schemes that exist in our universities. And last week we introduced our taxonomy, and I hope that was useful. And one of the purposes of the taxonomy was to answer that question, when bad stuff happens in your life and you go, why me? What have I done wrong? And the point of that taxonomy is to say, you know what? You didn't do anything wrong. You walked into an already existing problematic system and structure. So, okay, we provided that taxonomy so you can understand, you've got some literacy about what's happening around you. But our second stop this week is much more proactive. What we're going to be exploring is how you address this, how you, through short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategies, are able to manage these quote-unquote predatory regimes and predatory schemes, to quote the fantastic Gab. So that's what we're getting into this week. And the point of these two sessions together is we're trying to create a post-exploitation university culture. That's the gig. That's what we're trying to achieve. And what I'm trying to do is create role clarity, precision, care and compassion in the future of international higher education. So this week I'm going to put in my 10 tips, Tara's 10 tips to manage this pretty challenging environment in which we're all placed at the moment. So this week we're going to offer the strategies to manage these categories. And look, the research this week, I'm quite changed by it. I'm sorry if I get quite emotional for some of the research that we're talking about. I thought, oh, look, I've read all of this before. So, yes, I use the critical university studies. I use some organisational theory, obviously. But I also went back to the new material on coaching and coaching methodologies. But most upsetting, I think, was I went to the brand new literature about bullying. And I keep up with this debate, but I read the material that's emerged in the last year, 2025, I'm recording this. And the new research, wow, is showing some really troubling ways of thinking about bullying. It's showing what's actually occurring qual quant on the inside of a bullying culture. And so we're going to be using some of that work today as well. And it will change your life. It's certainly changed how I see the world. So I thank Gab for this, because I wouldn't have probably done this reading in this depth without Gab, so you're a legend. So can I just say also, what I'm talking about this week and what I talked about last week is antithetical to the arguments about bringing the whole self to work or authentic workplace, cultures. This is not that. And I have enormous respect. So if that's your argument and that's your belief structure, that's great. That's fantastic. And I respect that. But know that what we're talking about this week is antithetical to that. So this is a countervailing argument. You can absolutely disagree with it. That's great. But it is available for your consideration. So these strategies exist so that you have the capacity to make choices, right? So you're in a difficult situation. What do you do next? And so that's what we're answering today. And particularly if you're in right now, a really difficult or damaging environment, and I get that. I've worked, in 10 universities in 4 countries, and there is no doubt that I have been damaged. I have been damaged by some of those workplace cultures. And perhaps even sadder, I think, that the person the academic, the scholar, the human that I thought I would be, I'm not that person because of these environments. So appalling people in power can end your career, certainly, but they can also change the human being that you thought you would become. So that's why these discussions are so crucial. Now you'll notice I've avoided using the word toxic in these sessions, and I acknowledge Faye June's great book. So if you're interested in working through how to manage toxic environments, there's a workbook that Faye's done that I've referenced at the end of this post. So that's great to work through that. But I'm getting a little bit concerned at the moment that all sorts of words are being used, particularly in university cultures, toxic university cultures, and we use words like, narcissism, trigger, or, burnout, self-care, self-compassion. And can I say there's great literature around those words and phrases. We've used them in these nearly 500 vlogs in the last 10 years. But I'm concerned because they're becoming a bit of a shortcut. So when in doubt, it's toxic. When in doubt, it's a trigger. Whereas actually we need the narrative. We need to understand what is going on, how we got here, and how we get out of it, rather than simply slamming a word on a situation. Because remember, a toxin enters the body and then changes it. So what does toxicity therefore mean emotionally? Well, constant negativity, complaining, whinging, undermining of the self, abuse, manipulation, control, bullying, despair, misery, neglect. All those sort of pretty catastrophic emotional states. But what I'm trying to do today is not focus on the toxic person, but on problematic behaviours, and not focus on a really dreadful event, but start to look for the patterning of those events. So let's get into my Tara's 10 tips right now to manage this sort of pretty problematic situation. Let's do this. Right, Tara's 10 tip 1. Leave like Las Vegas Elvis or outlive them. This is the crucial first strategy. When you're confronting bullying, gaslighting, manipulative behaviours, including sexual assault, sexual harassment, we all have some choices to make. We hope that the policies and the procedures and the governance protocols will protect us. Occasionally they do, but as part of my Claustropolitan University project, we see that people and culture and human resource environments are being nested into a particular model of neoliberal management where exploitation is simply part of the requirement of the contemporary workplace. So remember, we've got an academic workforce, and we as academics, we're an unusual workforce. We work 7 days a week. We may work 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, 15 hours a day. You get where I'm going on this. We also have contracts where colleagues are paying their own salary because they've just got to keep getting grants. So the university is actually not paying for their salary. They're paying for their own salary. This is the sort of environment we're in at the moment. So if a university system is in profit, then remember, profit is created through the exploitation of workers. That's how profit exists. And that exploitation can also be created through instilling fear and worry and despair. And often this fear, worry and despair is accurate, is real, because of the fear of restructure. And that's a legitimate fear. That's a legitimate fear. So hoping that HR will intervene in this culture of exploitation frequently is an unsubstantiated hope, right? There are great human beings in HR, don't get me wrong. I've met some astonishingly inspirational people in my life who have been directors and head of HR. Great human beings. But we are living in a time where exploitation is rewarded. Therefore, the choice you've got to make when you're working for a bully, for a thief, for an exploiter, is you've either got to outlive them or you've got to leave. So, great example is if you're working for a skater in a regional university, then you can easily outlive them. So they're coming into a regional university to add lines to their CV, get themselves a title, get themselves a few more things on the CV, and they're going to skate out again. So if you're working for a skater and you can diagnose that via the taxonomy, you can outlive them, not a worry. But if you're working for a lazy frat boy or a drunken incompetent or a brittle pretender, then you're in trouble, because those people can't get another job because they're incompetent. Therefore, you will have to leave. Now, hopefully not immediately. That's why the taxonomy exists. When you recognize that particular characteristic, then you're going to be able to build your CV, tell your friends you're in the market for a new job, and start to look at the jobs that are being advertised. So have a plan and action it. In the old days, and probably this is now 20 years ago, people would leave. There would be a sort of cycle of people leaving, so you could outlive the person. If the person was ruining your life, know that, look, they'll probably go shortly. But that's not the case anymore, because we currently have two problems. We've got some really, really incompetent people who are in positions of power, and they're not leaving because they know they can't get a job anywhere else, because we all know that they're incompetent, right? So that's the first problem. But the second problem is that the jobs have dried up. Through the restructures, tens of thousands of remarkable human beings, academics, professional staff, have been let go from their university. So any job that appears, some astonishing people will apply for them, right? So therefore, the really poor people are trapped. They're trapped in a particular job. So the only option they have is to continue to torture the people that are around them. So therefore, our longer term strategy here is whenever a new person arrives, VC, DVC, PVC, Dean, Acting Associate, Deputising Dean, whatever, watch them carefully, read it through the taxonomy and decide whether you're going to be able to outlive them or you should leave the building like Las Vegas Elvis. Always, every single day, I want you to maintain a future orientation. Now remember, after the cruel boss or the cruel co-worker leaves, they're going to be replaced by somebody who may be worse. So what I need you to do is configure your career beyond one person, okay? I want you to configure a career beyond the present, beyond the now, and maintain a future orientation. Okay, that was the big one. Let's go to two. Upstanders, not bystanders. Oh yeah. So this is an emerging research area. I've been very interested in the word upstanding and upstanders in post-colonial theory. But this is incredibly important in terms of management and organisational culture. The victim of bullying cannot end the bullying. The only interventions in a bullying situation must come from outside of the victim. Okay, so that is the people around the bullying situation must call it out. They're the only people that can call the situation out and end it. But the recent research is showing that bystanders are not calling out this bullying behaviour. In fact, silent bystanders are intensifying the bullying behaviour. Oh my goodness. So that is also absolutely my experience as well, can I say, as we've talked about in the past. Steve had that truly dreadful experience in a British university where he would be attacked walking through the car park in the morning, walking back home in the afternoon, evening. He would open his office door and there would be excrement on the carpet floor. He would be shouted at on a daily basis and going through these dreadful processes with the head of school. And it was absolutely unbelievable, to be frank. Someone sort of watching it, it was horrific. And I remember the union delegate at the time, a wonderful guy, he phoned me to do what he described as a well-being check, to say, look, how's he going? Unbelievable. I said, look, he's all right, he's hanging in there, but it's not good, is it? And this wonderful gentleman said to me, this is the worst behaviour I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen shouting and attacks like this on any other human being. And I've come from corporate banking in the City of London. So what was significant though is that's terrible, obviously, but what's significant is the entire school knew that that behaviour was taking place because it was taking place in public. It was taking place in meetings, in corridors, in car parks. And interestingly, when Steve died, two of his former colleagues wrote to me and apologised, said they were so sorry that they didn't intervene in that situation because they were, a bit frightened and a bit scared. But you see, that lack of courage has consequences. These are life and death decisions for people. And if we are a bystander, what we need to recognise is if we are a bystander, then we are part of the problem. Silent bystanders increase the confidence of bullies. They intensify the bullying. That's what the new research is showing us. Now, Nia Bassel described in her remarkable book, The Bystander Nation, that we've become silent witnesses to everything in our lives. So Bansal asked, how have we become so indifferent? How have we all become so emotionally paralysed? Now Bansal offers an argument, and I think this is a really good argument, that through social media we are socialised to reward reaction over responsibility. Woo, yeah. So that means we're all sort of a bit emotionally fragmented, and every trauma becomes content. So pain is packaged up into Instagram posts. So in a university setting, we are increasingly numb to the restructures that are taking place every day in universities around the world. And we're forgetting that every human being that is restructured out of an organisation, their life is destroyed. Their families' lives are destroyed. But we're also, I think, becoming increasingly numb to underqualified people saying the unsayable. So what would have been clearly bullying 5 years ago is now pretty tame banter now, because our expectations of language and who we are and how we're treated has transformed through a social media environment. So I think there is a danger in forgetting. I think there is a danger in choosing not to see. So we have the power to interrupt these horrific narratives that are destroying people's lives. So please, if you get nothing else out of today, please remember the consequences of remaining a silent bystander. Inequality and injustice is based on you forgetting. So if we review our taxonomy of trouble, we can see that the silence of bystanders intensifies just about every category that we discussed last week. Therefore, one key strategy for all of us today is to make a decision to be an upstander rather than a bystander, to stand up when the name calling, when the abuse happens in our lives. But you see, the consequences to people's lives are so devastating if that behaviour is not stopped. So please, all of us, let us make a different decision. 3, maintaining privacy on your research plan. You knew we'd go here, right? So there's a large number of people in our universities who gain from your brilliance, your work ethic, your innovation. And luckily I realised very early in my career, and remember I was in the high humanities very early on in my career, and I saw in my 20s that there was a very large group of senior people that were absolutely reliant on, feeding off sort of undergraduates and honours students and master's students, PhD students, early career researchers, feeding off them like parasites. Now, my first 2 academic jobs were as a very, very junior lecturer, and I was teaching 4 courses per semester in one of those jobs, and the other job, when I was sort of tenure track and tenured, the workload policy required 400 points a year. I was always over 800 and occasionally over 1,000, right? So I was way overworked. But look, I was young, I was a woman, and so quite wonderfully it was sort of assumed, well, a young woman is a teacher, that she doesn't do any research. So of course, I used that invisibility, I used that time to get up early, work all weekend, and I gave myself the target of writing 10 refereed articles a year and getting my first book together. And it was all done invisibly. So it was all done on the quiet. No one knew what I was doing. And in fact, 5 years in to this 10-year job, the first performance review happened where there was a bit of the form where you've got to list your research. So I had to. And of course, that's when the head of school described me as, you are incredibly selfish. You are incredibly selfish. You need to share your work with others. And of course, thanks very much, I didn't, and just kept it going with my strategy. So this strategy is, I know, very difficult to enact in the experimental sciences. You require collaboration, you require equipment, you require funding. So I get all of that. So for our colleagues in the experimental sciences and engineering, for a while longer, I think you're going to have to put up with some random living and working their career as author 6 of 7. I think you're going to have to do that. But my strategy for you is, can you please have a different bit of your career where you can work on your own? So it might be SOTL, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, SOS, Scholarship of Supervision. It might be leadership, it might be followership. Have just a little tiny bit of your working life that you can do on your own. So maintain a private research plan and trajectory, work every day, and keep your publications moving down the whiteboard. Look, it's great, and I'm hoping we'll get to a point where we've got these professional and ethical boundaries, but there will always be people who are going to be pushing at those boundaries. Keep your research plans, your publications private. Get up early and get on with it. 4, support workload policies, procedures, and governance. Now, I've been a head of school, head of department, head of program before I was a dean of graduate studies, and I've seen senior people do absolutely everything in their power, really wild stuff, anything to avoid teaching. Secret deals, inventing roles, inventing titles to just not have to teach. So workload policies are great because they have precise formulae for different tasks and functions, enacting role clarity and ensure that the same system is applied on every single human being. So whenever a workload policy is invisible, in other words, where there are assumptions that everybody is working hard, then the lazy frat boys and the brittle pretenders get away with absolute rubbish. So in your department, in your school, in your faculty, always support a clear workload policy and formula. Ensure that it's implemented on all staff members and ensure that it is transparent so everybody can see everybody else's workload. So when I was a head of school, I made sure that was exactly the case. Every single staff member could transparently see how their workload was constructed. There were, visibility. If we've made an error, you can always talk about it, but everybody can see the work that everybody else is doing. So therefore, the best way to build this equitable system and to manage the pretenders in particular is for a workload policy to exist and for it to be transparent. And that of course leads to number 5, which is support governance, policies and procedures. Wow, this is important. Great research I read this week too. The Taxonomy of Trouble ignores policies, ignores procedures and ignores governance because they sort of get in their way. They stop other people being exploited. So policies at their best control exploitative behaviour. So we're talking about research codes of conduct, staff codes of conduct, student codes of conduct, authorship code of conduct, ethics. Right. So these policies exist to mitigate and manage asymmetrical power relationships. The powerful will oppress and discriminate if they can. And that's why so often you hear empowered crew talking about red tape, bloody red tape, and the bureaucracy, and all these bloody pointless policies, right? So whenever you hear those sorts of phrases, bureaucracy, red tape, you need to just switch on your brain for me, because that person wants the freedom to exploit. They want the freedom to go about their lives without handrails, without guardrails. So basically this is the human embodiment of Leonard Skinner's free bird. Okay, so remember that the disempowered, whether we're talking about staff or students, are protected by regulations, policies and procedures. If it all helps, and following on the great research from Rachel Verdin, and I'm applying her work in a lot of the material I'm doing at the moment, but governance, policies and procedures create an architecture of equality. Without policies, architectures of inequality structure our lives. The empowered maintain power by ignoring or avoiding policies. So that means at every possible occurrence, please support policies, support governance. They are there to protect you. 6, claim the power of no. In cultures of exploitation, what the empowered do is they remove choices. Everything about being empowered is trying to block the ability to see alternatives, to see the wizard behind the curtain. So often in our universities, the empowered have made decisions before a meeting happens. We've all experienced this, it's so common. We all go to the meeting thinking decisions are being made, and it's very clear all the decisions were made before the meeting was actually held. Because the taxonomy of trouble all meet and they negotiate what's going to happen here so that the rest of us cannot see the alternatives that are available. So it's about reducing the consciousness of alternatives from the disempowered. So this means that the bulk of people arrive at any particular meeting and the decisions have already been made, right? So when you're managing this sort of situation in a taxonomy of trouble, you've got one important task to do, and that is use a no. No, no, no. One word, in fact, that one word is a whole sentence. No. Remember that the behaviours of the taxonomy that we talked about last week are organised so that their weaknesses are masked, are shielded, and you are not able to see everything that's going on in the background and the alternatives that are available. So to be exploited, you must not have any sense that there are alternative choices available. Now, Meredith Holly's great research in The Inclusive Leader, this was brilliant, explored how we transform a dangerous or damaging workplace into an inclusive workplace. And the key, she argued, was early intervention, recognising the behaviour, the taxonomy, and intervening early. And she studied sexual harassment policies in particular. And she discovered that, unbelievably, let me just get this quote right, 75% of people who reported sexual harassment or discrimination experienced retaliation. 75% of people that reported experienced retaliation. So why would you ever report? Right? So the key is, therefore, is to use the taxonomy we introduced last week to get in early before you have to do the formal reporting and say no. Get your mates around you, do a collective no. Now, if this goes formal, retaliation means the victim will continue to be victimised. That is what the research is showing. The best way to stop this exploitation is no. Say no. A big, early, clear no. Give yourself the permission to say no in a meeting, in public. I need you to practice it, because remember, Tina, there is no alternative. That's what the taxonomy wants you to believe. Tina, there is no alternative. There is always an alternative. An alternative start with no. So practice in the mirror, no. Say no for me now. No? Got it. 7, always have a plan B. Now, we focused a lot on having a plan B when we did our How to Get a Job series. That was really the sub-theme of that series, was always look about you, always have a plan B, always find your exits. So every time you enter a job, locate your exits. It is wonderful if you can stay in a job for 5 years or a decade or even longer. That's terrific, but that's going to be increasingly rare. So always look for multiple job opportunities. Always have your CV 30 minutes away from being able to be sent to somebody. That is such a gift. So keep the CV up to date always. Because the difference between being really happy and enjoying your role and coming home sobbing your guts out and needing to be medicated is the appointment of one human being. One human being can destroy your life. One human being, in fact, can destroy a department, a faculty, or indeed a whole university. And of course it gets worse, because remember, bad leaders hire other bad leaders. Peter Principle 101. So if a bad leader arrives in your faculty, And bad leaders are often like buses. They come all at once. Please remember that you're not married to a particular university. They will betray you. They will betray your trust. Always keep your eyes open. Always have a plan B. And remember Marx's double freedom. All of us, we only have our labour power to sell, but we have a second freedom. We can sell it to anybody. Remember that second freedom. You can sell your labour power to anybody. That's your agency. 8. Do not confuse work with a religious vocation. Team, I get it. You love universities, I love universities, the commitment to learning, the commitment to research, the commitment to teaching, the commitment to the public good. I get it, it's magnificent. And I really don't want to take that away from you, but an academic life is different. It is a precious life. It is a scholarly life. It's a life of thinking and reflection and interpretation and learning and disseminating what we have learned. The problem is that we are exploited through that commitment. So we get up early, we mark through the weekends, we never have a public holiday. As I've often talked about, I've worked every Christmas day for the last 35 years, right? So this is an odd life. Now, I'm not saying don't do that. Academic life will never be clock in, clock out. That's not what we do. Academia colonizes our lives. And in so many ways, what an academic is we gift our life to knowledge. That's the point. But it is a job, and universities are workplaces. So try not to treat it as if it is a religious vocation. Now, I did this for one of my early jobs. I absolutely did. I loved that university. I can go emotional, go. I loved that university, and I committed to it. You know, it was a mission and social justice and focus, and I was there. I drank the Kool-Aid. I was absolutely, I loved that university, right? And because I was so passionately connected with it, I was exploited, I was bullied, I was abused, and I only realised the scale of that, of course, because you only realise the scale of the abuse when you leave. So after that experience, and when I had the cognizance of what had actually occurred, I never quite felt the same way about universities again. So if it helps, what we're going to do is I want you to focus on what matters. So knowledge matters, students matter, caring for the history of knowledge, the history of scholarship matters, disseminating our research to citizens, that matters. So what I'm asking that we do is we configure, and yours will be different from mine, but I want you to configure a mattering map for academic life. So you work out what is important to you, what matters. So instead of slotting in that lens, the taxonomy of troublemakers, as the first lens on your life, first work out what matters to you, and make that your first lens. Because when we have our commitments in our university lives, we are often exploited. And look, we can put up with bullying and harassment perhaps if we know we are sacrificing for the greater good. But what I need you to do is protect yourself, please, and separate out the intellectual life and working for universities. The intellectual life, working for universities. They may overlap. They may have a bit of an overlap, but they may not overlap very much. So just be aware of the different functions. The taxonomy of trouble are reliant on your commitments so that they can exploit you. Believe in the work, but don't allow that commitment to destroy your life. 9, separate from the workplace, reduce the social relationships with people that you work with. The world has changed. Working has changed, universities have changed. The boozy lunches, the going to the pub after a seminar, the supervisor who's way too close with their students, those days have gone. And that's good, I think. It's transforming a university into a properly regulated workplace. So increase the separation between your working life and the rest of your social life. And don't allow the social relationships to bleed. Remember, most of the categories in our taxonomy are reliant on a person you are working with finding out private information about you and then using that information to hurt you. Therefore, stop this situation at the first step. It's a workplace. No intimacy, no social relationships. If the exploiters do not have the information, they cannot hurt you. To quote the cliche of our time, mind your business. Mind your business. And of course then, the taxonomy of trouble don't have the data to be able to hurt you. Now, I was deeply moved, must not get upset, I was deeply moved by Hiroshi Kasaga's bullying observations. Very odd book, but very moving book. And he probed the suicide risks and results from bullying. And he reminds us that, quote, bullying is born in a social environment, end of quote. It's created through sociality rather than an individual's behaviour. So start to block the sociality. Too often I think we talk about an individual perpetrator or an individual victim. And Kasaga describes bullying as, quote, an information war, end of quote. Amazing. And argues that bullying starts with gossip and rumour. So the time has come to stop the gossip and the rumour. It can have deadly consequences. So remember, a large number of our taxonomy that we discussed last week are narcissists. Now, the great gift about working for narcissists, and I've worked for a few, is they're only actually terribly interested in themselves. So they don't care about you. So the way to handle a narcissist is make every single conversation about them. How they're, oh, great haircut. Great, oh, that's a fantastic haircut. Oh, I saw your new car. Oh, I read the new article that you're on. That's fascinating, isn't it? So make everything about them. And so if you make everything about them, all conversations about them, then your research, your teaching, your life has been withheld from them. So make everything about them, and that keeps your life and your information safe. Last one, 10. Remember the power of the double refusal. There are all sorts of phrases and movements that accompany the fear and disgust and despair of the contemporary workforce. We see burnout, we see quiet quitting, we see the right to disconnect, which of course has some legislation in Australia. But this is really the moment, I think, of Baudrillard's double refusal. Now, this theory is decades old, and it's probably one of the least used of all Baudrillard's theories, and it's still pretty invisible in the leadership and followership literature. In fact, I was searching to see who's been using it, and of course it's sort of me, really. But it is an interesting theory to consider, because the double refusal constructs two stages, team. The first refusal is a leader is incompetent. They're a lazy frat boy, they're unqualified, they do not know what they're doing. So the first stage of the double refusal is a leader who cannot and will not lead. They like the title, they like the office, they like the salary, but they just don't know what they're doing. So that's the first refusal. But the second refusal is the interesting one. This comes from the workers, the followers, who have recognised that the leader is incompetent and refuse to follow them. So they know the leader is rubbish and they ignore them. So this is the double refusal. And therefore that is the profound consequence of incompetent leaders. Good workers, great workers, disconnect, quiet quit, or do the minimum. So all the vision statements, strategic plans, operational plans, pick something, risk registers, none of that is going to be able to dislodge the double refusal. It's a fascinating methodology and model to watch, because what you start to see is the drip, 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 drip decline of a business or an organisation or a university. It doesn't happen in a month or a year, but within 5 years, endlessly, the organisation is destroyed. Amazing. So there's no commitment, there's no motivation, there's no belief in the project. Instead, the focus in a double refusal is denying accountability, denying responsibility, hiding incompetence and weakness, and sort of nodding at meetings, but not actually doing anything. So the double refusal really is describing what is happening in international higher education right now. Wave after wave after wave of people who shouldn't be anywhere near a leadership role, and basically people who you wouldn't trust to unpack their own groceries are now running international higher education. They're holding leadership positions, but just because you hold a leadership position doesn't mean you can lead. Because leadership is not about leadership. Leadership is about followership. And when your followers, the workers, see finally the wizard behind the curtain, or the PVC with 40 career publications, when that's about the level a junior lecturer has to get to before they even get a job these days. When you've got someone with 40 career publications, mostly co-authored, telling us about research strategy, we all look at them and go, yeah, nah. That's when you start to get silence, quiet quitting, resignation, or indeed the double refusal. Because there's a recognition the leader is not leading. And for academics, what this means is you're following the policy, you're doing the work, you're making sure the students are taught, you're making sure you're doing the right thing, ethics and so forth, producing research, but you're just not giving respect or credibility or space or light to a leader that is not leading. So Queen Gab, this has been an amazing couple of posts, and I thank you for having the courage that you've had to sort of say something weird is happening, let's talk about it. So I'm glad you've done that. But also what I want to do is make sure you've got strategies in place when something weird is happening, that you can take action, but you also have a plan. What I need you to do, Gab, is to remain functional in a system that is not functional. So I want to finish with a statement from Catherine Sanderson. Quote, "Good people can and do engage in bad behaviour." End of quote. So when we're all surrounded by angry, aggressive, nasty people, we lose our way, we lose our perspective, we lose our code, who we are as a human. So we follow the leader and we abuse others, even though we would never think that we would do that. You know those people who film the abuse of others rather than intervening in it? So instead of breaking up the fight, they film it. But what Sanderson confirmed, and again, this could change your life. I'm still processing this, to be honest with you, but Sanderson's argument was, whenever we confront an ambiguous situation, so we're in the workplace and we don't quite know what's going on, then what we do in those circumstances is we look to others to see what they're doing. So what happens is, that's how we become bystanders. Something terrible happens, we're confused, it's an ambiguous situation, and we look to others, and everybody joins together in the ambiguity to become bystanders, and the behaviour escalates. So therefore, what our taxonomy of trouble does is stops the ambiguity. Stops the ambiguity. So you recognise what's going on and you can make a clear decision in real time. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.